As always, thank you, Tom Kane, for a great start to our Sunday. And armed with her latest mixtape, Ruth Shimmin will be along at 10 with more of the best music of the 80s. But right now, this is Judith Lay saying Moromai and welcome as we look back and look forward as we approach the end of the year with a specially extended edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
The turning of the year can be a strange time of uncertainty, can't it? Maybe we look back over the past 12 months with that familiar mix of joys and sorrows that we all experience, and we're perhaps a little fearful of what this next year might bring. I've read a lot of New Year poetry, but at this time I always return to the familiar words of Minnie Louise Haskins. Written in 1908, the poem caught public attention when King George VI quoted it in his Christmas broadcast to the British Empire in 1939, just months after the outbreak of the Second World War. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me towards the hills and the breaking of day in the lone east. This is a New Year carol with music by Benjamin Britten and words that describe a ceremony originating in Wales. Very early in the morning on New Year's Day, young people would gather evergreen foliage, draw fresh water from the well, and go from house to house, sprinkling the water over the inhabitants or on their doors, sometimes in return for a few coins. As they did this, they would sing, "Here we bring new water from the well so clear, here to worship God with this happy new year." Benjamin Britten's New Year Carol, sung there by the Cambridge Singers, conducted by Sir John Rutter. 2026 is the year of the Manx language, and it promises to be an extra busy year for Manx Language Development Officer Ruth Keggin-Gell and the team at Culture Vannin. And the wider use of Manx language in worship is something I know we'll be talking more about on this programme. When it was time to remember one of our island saints on St Bridget's Eve, Ilvrisha, Ruth Keggin-Gell joined us on the programme with this, a story from the East Baldwin Valley.
I've heard tell of an old woman who lived out at Baldwin in a place called Ween. Every night she would go to the door before going to bed and open it and say, "Mavanach leis na ferishin," which means, "My blessings with the fairies." Also, on Íl Bhríse, which takes place at the start of February, she'd prepare the barn for Bríse, lest she should come to visit them. A round table was put in there, with some bread, cheese and a casket of ale. A big fat candle was placed on the table as a light for Bríse, and the bed was shaken up to make her comfortable, and the door was left open wide. Then she'd say, "Bríse, Bríse, whoever's house you come to our house tonight." Once there was a young man called Dúin Luan who was going after the young women, and he was on his way home when he saw a light in the barn at Ween. When he saw the stuff on the round table, he sat down on the chair and ate the bread and cheese till he had had his fill and drank all the ale. Then he got up onto the bed and rolled himself around and made it look like someone had been sleeping in there. And when the day was about to break, he made his way home. When the old woman of Ween came to the barn to see whether Bríse had made a visit, she saw that the bread and cheese had all been eaten and the ale had all been drunk. She lifted up her hands and crossed herself, and she clapped her hands with joy that Bríse had been in the barn and that she had accepted the bread, the cheese and the ale. She exclaimed to the people passing by that Bríse's blessing would be on her this year. Dúin Luan didn't say a word about it until after the old woman's death, so she died believing that it had been Bríse in the barn that night. Bríse, Bríse, tagas mahai, tagas atayem noch. Bríse, Bríse, taro tagas atayem noch. O fajuli and Doris de Bríse as lig de Bríse chitstiach. Bríse, Bríse, taru gesatayem noch.
Thank you, Manx Language Development Officer Ruth Keggin-Gell. And Íl Bhríse on January the 31st and Léal Bhríse on February the 1st mark the coming of spring. In late spring of this year, we reported on the death of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo. At that time, Canon Philip Gillespie, now back in ministry on the island and based in the co-cathedral of St Mary of the Isle here in Douglas, was still in Rome in his role as rector of the Beda College, a seminary for older men from English-speaking countries who are training for the Roman Catholic priesthood. So Canon Philip was perfectly placed to send us regular reports for the programme.
It was only last Sunday, Easter Day, that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, made an appearance on the balcony of the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. He spoke few words. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "I wish you a good and a happy Easter." After the blessing, he delighted the pilgrims by taking to the Popemobile and driving through the square, and indeed beyond the square, into Via Conciliazione to greet people. His voice was weak, but little did we think that within 24 hours we would be receiving the news of his death. Nor did we think that we would celebrate on Saturday morning his funeral at the Vatican, and then his burial at the church much loved by him, the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary, on the Esquiline Hill here in Rome. When making any foreign journey, Pope Francis would come to St. Maria Maggiore to entrust himself and his visit to the care and protection of Mary, Salus Populi Romani, the health and protectress of the Roman people. I was privileged and honoured on Saturday morning to participate in the Requiem Mass at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. It was a most splendid and inspiring liturgy, and a beautiful celebration of the life and the hope of Pope Francis, Pope of the Universal Church, but also, as he would frequently emphasise, Bishop of the City and Diocese of Rome. This was also a local church expressing its gratitude for the kind and gentle way in which Francis led by his example. Pope Francis was, as the Italians would say, una persona per bene, a person for the good. He was good to others, attentive to their needs, attentive in a particular way to the needs of the marginalised, the not noticed, the victims, the refugees. He inspires us and challenges us. Be a person for the good. He asks that his funeral should be marked by humility. Now, that's not easy when you are dealing with a lying-in state when over 200,000 people wanted to spend a moment to acknowledge the impact of this man. And indeed, even a greater gathering yesterday, including heads of state and of government. It was a grand celebration on a grand scale. However, it did not feel pompous or removed. It was, in fact, at its heart, exactly the same liturgy which will be celebrated in our churches on the island for each and every Christian soul who comes to us to seek the prayer and intercession of the church. At meetings, in his writings, he would often end with a request, non dimenticatevi di pregare per me. Please don't forget to pray for me. Well, the church and the world over these days has not neglected to pray for him. Now we need to ask him to inspire us and to accompany us on this pilgrim way of faith, of hope, and of love.
Thank you, Canon Philip Gillespie, talking to us from Rome. The Sistine Chapel Choir is the oldest choral institution in the world. It's accompanied the life of all the popes since the early centuries of Christianity, surviving difficult times along the way. But it continues to function in the same way today and provided the simple, prayerful Gregorian chants that Pope Francis requested. There were no hymns. Pope Francis had made it very clear that his funeral mass should be as modest as possible. He said it should be the funeral of a pastor and disciple of Christ, and not of a powerful person in this world. A couple of weeks later, Canon Philip was back to tell us that everything was in place for the start of the conclave, the election of the next pope. As it turned out, the conclave that elected Cardinal Robert Prevost as pope was very short, lasting just 2 days, with white smoke seen billowing out of the chimney on the afternoon of the second day, after just 4 ballots. And the announcement was made that he would now be called Leo, the 14th Pope to take that name. A month later, I had a unique opportunity to learn more about the conclave in conversation with one of the cardinal electors, and this was all through another, much more local appointment. In May, it was announced that Bishop John Sherrington, an auxiliary bishop in the Diocese of Westminster, was to be the new Archbishop of Liverpool, following the retirement of Archbishop Malcolm McMahon. And of course, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Liverpool includes the Isle of Man. So I went to Liverpool for the Mass of Installation for Archbishop John Sherrington, held in the Cathedral of Christ the King. Before this move to Liverpool, Archbishop John spent 14 years in ministry in Westminster. working with Cardinal Vincent Nichols, who is the Archbishop of Westminster and also the leader of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales. And as you might imagine, Cardinal Vincent was in the cathedral for Archbishop John's installation mass. Cardinal Vincent was also one of the elector cardinals who formed the conclave that met to elect the new pope. So this was something I was keen to talk about with the cardinal as we sat in the cathedral before the start of the mass. But first, I wondered if possibly Bishop John's move would be Liverpool's gain, but Westminster's loss.
You're quite right. It is our loss, and it is your gain, and I'm delighted. I've known Bishop John. We've worked together for the last 14 years, and he's a fine, fine man, excellent bishop, and I'm delighted that this diocese, in which I was born and brought up and ordained a priest, is in such good hands. And it's a great pleasure to be here this morning in the cathedral for his Mass of installation.
Now, just recently, Cardinal, you have been very much in the media spotlight as a cardinal elector, one of those cardinals who was in the right age bracket, young enough to go to vote for the new pope. Now, I was very touched by an interview that you gave when you said that you felt intimidated. This was before the conclave started, that you felt intimidated by the process. So at what point did that feeling change?
After the funeral and the burial of Pope Francis, we had 7-8 days of what they called general congregations. Now, they were long meetings in which we listened to each other. To begin with, they were quite tense. But as the time got nearer for the actual conclave itself, I think things became a bit clearer. So when the 133 elector cardinals moved into the Santa Marta house, and we had our phones taken off us and even anything electronic. They even had a look at my electric toothbrush. So we were really put apart from the world. That actually brought a great peace. And I would want to say to people, try turning off your phone for a couple of days. You'll suddenly find you've got more time, you've got more inner peace, it's easier to pray, it's easier to be with other people. That's what we had to do. And I think it was at that point I began to feel we're involved here in something that really is guided by the Holy Spirit. And a thing that struck me very, very forcefully, we were only 2.5 days or so within that closed environment. I never heard a single word of rancor. I never heard a single word of somebody saying, don't trust that one. Or of anybody saying, please vote for me, I'll do a great job. I mean, it was the most peaceful and prayerful time. And it led quite smoothly, I think, to a clarity of view and then a clarity of candidate as well. That first evening in the Sistine Chapel, having had a good look at all the paintings and stuff, I was thinking to myself, isn't there a quicker way of doing this? But the slow pace was an intrinsic part of what we were doing because it slowed everything down and gave us time to ponder and in that sense be guided, be prompted. I think there were things in that meeting that were like a stone dropped into a pond and it's just sent out ripples, and I could feel in myself, now that's important. That really is important. And then when you see a group move in a certain direction, and you don't do that if you're in a rush. So patience and the slow pace was a very important part of this.
Do you think also these practices, keeping them all the same, reinforces the fact that Pope Leo is not a successor to Pope Francis? He's a successor to Peter, who was appointed by Jesus. That's the continuity, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that was pointed out a couple of times by some of the early speeches that were made. It's the continuity that's important.
Do you feel in any way that the experience has not changed you, but maybe strengthened or done something to your own personal faith?
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm very, very touched by the experience, partly in those ways of having a bit of space in my life, turning away from the phone for a while, having much more attention to the small promptings of the Holy Spirit, and being ready to trust the instincts of others, maybe a bit more promptly. In this conclave of 133 people, somewhere there was a man with his name written in the heart of Jesus, and in brackets afterwards, Pope. And we just had to be sensitive enough to know who the Lord had already chosen and prepared, and we just had to be attentive to get it right. People say that in the conclave was their ambition, and I've said, you've got to understand the prize for winning this election is the cross. You die to yourself, and it's not by chance that you're given another name, because in some ways Robert Prevost is over. He's now Pope Leo, constantly. That's a huge sacrifice and a gift.
Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings, so may we come to rest where angels sing. Our eyes have longed to see your loving face, to live within your courts for all our days. Beyond the moon and stars, as deep as night, so great our hunger, Lord, to see your light. The sparrow finds her home beneath your wings, so may we come to rest where angels sing.
Beyond the Moon and Stars reminds me of the Luke Jerram art installation, the Museum of the Moon, which attracted some 18,000 visitors during its 3-week stay in the cathedral in Peel. There'll be another Luke Jerram installation, the planet Mars, in the cathedral in February. Another visitor to the island this year was Reverend Dr. Inderjit Singh Bhogul. I was particularly keen to meet him as I clearly remember interviewing him exactly 25 years earlier, when he made history by being the first person from a minority ethnic background to be elected President of Conference in the Methodist Church. Inderjit's parents grew up in a Sikh family in Punjab, but to escape the atrocities of the late 1940s in their own country, the young couple were encouraged to move somewhere safer. So they went first to Nairobi in Kenya, where Inderjit was born, and when the situation became less stable there, they crossed the border to Tanzania, Tanganyika as it was then in the early 1960s. But after only a short time there, they moved to the UK and settled in Dudley in the West Midlands. Having been brought up steeped in the Sikh faith, with the temple almost on his doorstep, 11-year-old Inderjit found himself adrift in an unfamiliar and racist world.
The temple was my playground. It's where I learnt much and was steeped in the Sikh faith. When we came to live in the Midlands, there were only 2 Sikh temples in the whole of the UK then. And I wanted to go to the nearest place of worship, as I always had done. In Dudley, the nearest place of worship to me was a Methodist church. Now, at school, one of my contemporaries was Lenny Henry, by the way. I was at the same school as him. He talks about the kind of racist behaviour we all experience as young people with the darker skin. And school was not a good experience from my fellow pupils. But I went to this chapel And at the door was a gentleman who greeted me very warmly. "Welcome, young man," he said. "It's lovely to see you. Come on in, have a seat here, and I'll come and sit with you in a few minutes." And I thought, well, that was a bit different because, I was 11, and it didn't matter what age you are, we all want to be treated with respect and dignity. And that started it for me.
As a teenager, Inderjit had planned to be a lawyer, but the Methodist Church, which had become his spiritual home, encouraged him to explore a call to ordained ministry, which he did.
And here I am, 60 years later, with all the history that I bring. And the concept of welcome is really important to me. Because I sit here as a Methodist minister now, it doesn't mean I've given up on all the learning I received within Sikhism, the values of the Sikh faith, which are about hard work and honouring God and living with generosity. I mean, I didn't put all that away in my life within the church. It's just that I found direction for my life in Christ and in his teaching. He always gave priority to people who others were rejecting, those on the margins of his society. And he kept an open table and he ate with everyone who would eat with him, but he especially welcomed those that nobody else would be welcoming. So that was his style, and that's what I try to model myself on.
And the concept of welcome has indeed been at the very heart of Inderjit's ministry. And now he's the founder and president of the City of Sanctuary, a charity building a movement of welcome across the UK, vibrant networks providing welcome, support and opportunity to people seeking sanctuary. Because years of active ministry have reinforced Inderjit's firm belief in what is really the biggest challenge to humanity.
I would say the biggest challenge that faces humanity now is to learn to live with those who are different from you. If we can do that, then we can together tackle more effectively causes like global warming, poverty, inequality, and looking at what it means to build a world of peace for everyone. So it's absolutely critical today. Ease of travel has brought people of different religions to be neighbours together. Here on the Isle of Man, wherever we are, we live in a multi-faith world. I would encourage everyone, wherever you are, to grow in respect for those who are different, especially those of a different religion, and you will be an enriched person. And there's a bit of a fear of somebody who's different. I understand that, but actually the more you get to know people, however different they are, the more you will discover similarities and that we're all human beings at the end of the day. One of the causes of fear, particularly in people of faith, let's say Christian faith, is that they might water down or dilute their religion by engaging with somebody of another faith. But actually I would say that you will find you deepen your faith, not dilute it, and that you grow in your faith. We need all the wisdom of all the faiths and all the disciplines, all the ideologies to understand the greatness of Christ. So, go and talk to somebody of another faith and say, give me your understanding of faith. What's your understanding of God? You may not agree with what people say, but at least it'll make you think about your own faith, and it will deepen and enrich and broaden your faith and your understanding of God and Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit in the world.
Love is flowing like a river, flowing out through you and me, spreading out into the desert, setting all the captives free. Joy
The Archbishop of York was another visitor to the island this year, talking about the start of Faith in the North.
My great longing is that I want to share with you, I want to share with your listeners, the story of what God has done in Jesus. Because I think it is what our world cries out for. I don't know what you and your listeners think when they look at our world at the moment. I look at the world, I see such sorrow, such confusion, such hurt. And I believe what God shows us in Jesus is, well, this is what human beings are meant to be like. This is how you could live your life. So I want to communicate that story.
And this brings us to the thing that is really driving you at the moment, which is your movement, Faith in the North, a 3-year movement that's going to have 3 distinct parts to it. We're not talking about the north of England when we talk about Faith in the North. It's the northern province.
That's right.
The Church of England is in 2 halves, and you are in charge of the northern province, which extends over a huge area, including this, the Isle of Man.
I'm very happy to say the lovely Isle of Man is part of the province of York in church terms. And I believe the Isle of Man has got a lot to share and teach the rest of us when it comes to the things that Faith in the North care about, which is very simple. Prayer, storytelling, planting churches. That's what the saints of old did. They were people of prayer, they told stories of faith, and they planted churches. And your local saint, St. Maccled, I mean, I think I'm right in saying it was the year 450 that he arrived on what is now the Isle of Man and planted a church, and there's a well up in the north of the island. What a fantastic story. But I wonder to myself, does everybody in the Isle of Man know this amazing story? Certainly over in England, we don't know his story. I want to tell people his story because I think we can learn from that, and then we can be inspired by it.
Now, the focus of this first year is the Lord's Prayer. And you're saying it's a prayer to learn by heart and to take it into our hearts, because we're living in a confusing and hurting world. And you believe that these words have got the secret to a better, more fulfilled life for everybody.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing about the Lord's Prayer is that it doesn't just teach you how to pray, it teaches you how to live. The Lord's Prayer teaches you what to want. So in Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus introduces the Lord's Prayer to his disciples, he says, "Your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask him." To which I think the reply is, well, why bother to ask then if he knows already? To which I think the answer is, because we don't know. We don't know what we want, or we seek after all the wrong things. So this prayer is like an education in desire. It's training the heart. So yes, it's teaching you how to pray, but it's also teaching you how to be human, teaching you what to want. So it's a bit of a revolution. I think perhaps there ought to be a little bit of a health warning to go with it, to say, really be careful when you say this prayer. It might change you. So I've embarked upon this tour across the northern province, therefore including the Isle of Man, just teaching people about the Lord's Prayer. For some people, of course, teaching them for the first time. And prayer is it's at the very heart of the Christian life. But for Faith in the North, it's prayer, storytelling, planting churches, pilgrimage. These are the things that we want to help churches rediscover.
And this coming year, we'll be exploring the second year of Faith in the North, which is all about pilgrimage. And because we're still very much in the Christmas season, this seems a good moment to add some music from Aled Jones.
As I walked down the road at set of sun, the lambs were coming homeward one by one. I heard a sheep bell softly calling them along the little road to Bethlehem. As I drew nigh, I heard sweet Mary sing a lullaby. She sang about our lambs that
across the ever silver sheep bell rang. The lambs are coming home, sweet Mary sang. Your star of gold, your star of gold is shining in the sky.
So sleep, my little king, all
As I walked down the road at set of sun, the lambs were coming homeward one by one.
I heard a ship softly calling
Along the little road to Bethlehem.
Sam Stockhill was appointed last autumn as the new Community Partnership Manager for the Leprosy Mission, in charge of a large part of northern England, which extends to include the Isle of Man. Here, the Leprosy Mission is a separate Manx-registered charity, but benefits from visits from Sam with news of specific appeals and support for their local fundraising work. But the conversation I recorded with Sam on his last visit wasn't just a Leprosy Mission update. It was an inspiring story of faith and trust in God.
I've been working for the Leprosy Mission since September last year, and my connection with the work of the Leprosy Mission goes back to Nepal, where I was a missionary for 8 years and just returned September last year.
Were you there with your wife and children?
Yes, so we moved out back in 2014 to New Zealand with the plan to go to Papua New Guinea. The earthquake happened in Nepal in 2015. We started praying for Nepal, and God really broke our hearts for Nepal. So instead of going to Papua New Guinea, we took a change of plan, and so it was a big detour to get us to Nepal eventually in 2016.
So where did all this strong faith come from, Sam? Are you from a servant-hearted family?
Yeah, from a really good Christian family. I didn't live as a Christian as a teenager. It was when I was 18 and I was going to university. At that point, I started thinking, what do I want from my life? And what legacy do I want to leave? What do I want my life to amount to? And what is a successful, meaningful life? And it's then when I started thinking about, well, maybe instead of going into the fields that I was thinking about, maybe I'll take some time out, go to Bible college and pursue the faith of my parents a bit more seriously and see if what Jesus said about giving up your life and losing your life to find it is really real. So I went for it. I went wholehearted for it.
Now, you're married to Hannah.
Yeah.
Did she share your passion for your servant-heartedness?
Oh, absolutely. So I met Hannah at Bible college in Hungary. So she's from America and she's amazing. I mean, when I went to Bible college, there were lots of Americans and my friends all said, you'll end up marrying an American. I said, I won't marry an American. But I couldn't stop myself because Hannah she's amazing. She's the kindest person. I mean, talking about sharing that passion, the first time I ever met her was in a prayer meeting and we were praying for some countries and she was praying and just weeping and praying and weeping and praying. I'd never heard someone pray with so much compassion and passion. And I thought to myself, I want to marry this woman. We moved to England and she was almost disappointed. She wanted to be a missionary from being really young. And she was saying, you know, my vision of my life was I'm going to be in a mud hut somewhere, going and looking after the poorest of the poor and reaching people with the gospel. And we ended up in Bradford and we had some amazing years of ministry in Bradford. But we moved to New Zealand, as I mentioned, with the plan to go to Papua New Guinea. When we started praying about Nepal, I went to visit. Hannah didn't go to visit. The flights were expensive, so I went on my own. I came back, I said, it's going to be really different, but it's incredible. I think we need to go. And without question, she just said, let's go. We went fundamentally as independent missionaries. And that was quite scary. It seemed like a great idea, but I remember the week before we went to Nepal, dropping my kids off at school, at primary school, and having this moment of thinking, what am I doing? I'm taking my kids to a country I know very little about. We're not with an organisation. We're just going to turn up and see what God wants us to do in this place. And I was driving home and I was crying on the way home, thinking, am I really going to do this? So I think we've done a lot of courageous stuff, but it's not been easy. We've been afraid about things, but it's just been that conviction of this is what God has for us, and that sense that something's more important than your fear, and not listening to your fear. And yeah, we've always had a strong conviction that you don't regret the things you step out and do and try. You know, all the adventures you take. I think you have regrets when you don't do things that you wish you maybe had. And we said we're going to live in a way where we don't have regrets. We're just going to live by faith and try things and see where it ends up. But when we first turned up, I mean, we just turned up in a guest house. We had one Nepali friend who met us, a friend of a friend. And we said to him, you know, where's the local shop? What do we eat tonight? Are we safe to go out? We just knew so little about what life was like. And obviously that changed over time. And we connected with a lot of different organisations as the years went by. But we turned up with very little knowledge of what the country was like and where we were going. But just, a conviction that God was going to lead us and use us.
Did you find that the people were intrigued by you or supportive of you? Or
they were so welcoming. It was fun, but it was also difficult at times to walk out and be like celebrities with this big family of young kids and have everyone stopping and wanting to take photos and wanting to talk to us. I mean, it was great for me because I was so eager to learn the language. So everybody wanted to come and talk, and I could practice my Nepali, although they wanted to speak English often. But people were really welcoming. And I think because we put it as a priority to learn the language, to love the food, and to immerse ourselves in their culture. And I think people really respected that we came to love their culture and to get to know them. Hannah is the kindest person you'll meet, and she couldn't go to the shop without bringing somebody home. So she'll go to buy some vegetables, and 2 hours later, she'll turn up at the house with 3 other ladies who she'd been chatting to, and she'd invited them back for tea. She was just incredible, and she's the one who opened most of the doors for ministry, because she would just meet people, talk to people, and we would be doing kind of Bible studies in a house with new believers, and it would all be through Hannah's networking. She was just brilliant at that. After a few years, she became a teacher in an international school in Kathmandu, which was an amazing opportunity for her. There was a bit of sadness that she didn't have the same freedom to go out and to do those kind of pioneering networking things that she did in the beginning.
So when you were there, how much incidence of leprosy did you see?
Well, that became a big part of what I was doing. So very early on, I had a Nepali friend, who had been going to a local leprosy colony. And he said, Sam, do you want to come with me? I think when I went to Nepal, I was aware that leprosy was still an issue in the world. I had no idea how prevalent and devastating it still is. I mean, someone's diagnosed with leprosy every 2 minutes. I had no idea that it was still such an issue. I agreed to go with my friend. There was definitely a bit of fear. I was almost ashamed to ask, is it safe? Can I shake people's hands if they want to? Am I okay to touch people? I didn't ask. I was ashamed to ask. So I went along with a bit of fear, and it was just broken on the first time I went. So these are people who were diagnosed with leprosy a long time ago and did not get the treatment that they needed. And they'd been living on the colony for a long time. So they were severely disfigured and disabled by the disease. And it was just heartbreaking to see the conditions that they were living in, and the physical deformities and the pain that people were in, and the ongoing sickness and the low immunity. That was heartbreaking. So initially, I was doing a lot of different projects to improve the conditions, whether fixing roofs or putting solar lighting in or giving wheelchair access to people, doing a lot of work like that. And as time went on, again, I felt God's prompting to say what these people really need is relationship. They need you to go around their homes regularly, to be consistent with them, to just spend time to listen to their stories. And thankfully, after a few years, I was proficient enough in Nepali to have a conversation with people. I still sounded like a Yorkshireman speaking Nepali, but my understanding was very good. So I could have a conversation, and that became my main focus, to go around homes and weekly to listen to the stories of the same people, the same stories, week in, week out. And that took the heartbreak to another level, because you realise that the pain of leprosy is not just a physical, it's a rejection. So these people were not from Kathmandu. They were living in Kathmandu because at a young age they were diagnosed with leprosy. They were pushed out of their families, of the communities. They were sent to the wonderful leprosy hospital in Kathmandu and Andaman, which is an incredible place. They were treated and they should have been welcomed back into their own communities because after treatment you're not contagious. But they were not allowed to go back to their families, not allowed to go to the communities, so they had to live in this colony in Kathmandu. And that's what's awful. A lot of them were late 50s, 60s and saying, I've not seen my family since I was a teenager or a child. And that was heartbreaking. So it was a privilege to just sit there and to hear their pain and to be present with them and to love them and to spend time with them week in, week out. And that's what I did for 8 years.
The stigma still attaches to the disease. It stops people admitting that they are unwell, and that's when it needs to be caught.
Somebody's diagnosed with leprosy every 2 minutes. When it is treatable, but people don't own up to the symptoms they have, they don't come forward. So generally the stories that we hear time and time again is a child or a young adult notices a patch on their skin, they're concerned about it, they have a gut feeling this could be leprosy, but they don't say anything. Because the moment that they say to people at their school or their family, I think this might be leprosy, people are going to shun them. So they keep quiet until the nerve damage becomes too bad that the hands don't function anymore. And a child will be in school and they can't hold a pencil anymore. Or a lady's working in the field and she can't hold her tools anymore. She can't hide it. People know. But by that point, other people have got it. So the rest of your family might have it. And also your disabilities now are going to be permanent. So that's what's heartbreaking, that if people could come forward early and be treated early, disabilities would be minimised and transmission would be minimised. But it's the stigma that stops people. It's the stigma, and then also it's the lack of knowledge in healthcare professionals or the lack of access to healthcare that stops people getting the treatment they need.
So what brought about the decision to come back, Sam?
It was a hard decision to come back because Nepal in many respects is home for us. So my children, I would say they're half Nepali, if not more. That's the food they want to eat. So they've tried fish and chips. They don't like it. They want rice and lentils. They want Nepali food. And we love the country so much. We love the people so much. And we loved what we were doing. And it's a privilege, actually, that we came back not because of burnout or relational issues. We came back because we felt it was the right time for our children, who were getting a little bit older, to have some time to adjust to the culture of the UK before they go to university. So our oldest is 15 and doing GCSEs. And we felt it was the right time to come back. Having said that, it's still on our hearts, and I could see us going back in the future at some point. My oldest girl, Millie, is working in my dad's coffee shop. She's saving up money to go back and visit next year. And she's already saying once she finishes university, she'd love to go back. So I could see us all going back at some point.
I would have imagined that coming back, seeing a job with the Leprosy Mission, did you feel that that was very much God's prompting for you?
Absolutely. And it's the continuity with what I was doing before, because I was saying to someone recently, we had a lot of goodbyes to say when we left Nepal, and it was hard to say goodbye to people. But the most moving goodbye was we did a celebration at the leprosy colony. For my time there, they put a small party on for me, and that was perhaps the most emotional goodbye, because I loved that community so much. And I got to speak to a few of them recently through a friend who's still working there, and he told them that I'm working for the Leprosy Mission, and they were so moved to hear that. And to keep that continuity, to be advocating for them, to be speaking out for them still, is a real privilege.
And there is nobody that can speak out better than somebody who has been there, where these people are your friends. The country is somewhere you love and that you know, and that's the most passionate and effective speaking, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I'm speaking from experience, but it's a cause that I feel so aligned with that it's easy to be speaking out on their behalf.
There was a big reaction to that interview with Sam Stockhill. People were really moved by the obvious passion shared by Sam and his wife to do all they could to minister to leprosy sufferers, so obviously putting their needs above their own. But an even greater response was yet to come. Bishop Tricia chose the 2nd of November, shortly after her return to full-time ministry following a period of compassionate leave, to talk bravely and honestly about the sudden death of her husband Andrew in June this year. She said that she wanted an opportunity to thank the many people who had, in so many different ways, helped and supported her during this tragic time. But the programme contained so much more, and the response was massive. It would be impossible for me to extract any portion that would do it justice, but the whole programme is available as an At Your Service podcast, and I'd urge you to listen again if you missed it, or consider sharing it with anyone who finds himself in a similar situation. And indeed, the whole year's programmes are available as individual podcasts at manxradio.com or via your usual podcast provider. Looking back over the year, I'm so grateful to have had the chance to talk about such a wide range of topics. The start of Bhogul Church in Christchurch in Laxey, the visit of the cathedral choristers to war graves in Belgium and singing at the Menin Gate, learning about the Andreas Benevolent Society in conversation with farmer Brian Radcliffe, discovering a new style of ministry in St Ninian's Church with Reverend Alex Brown and Reverend Stephen Heron, and welcoming Reverend Catherine McPhee in a new role, spending half of her time as leader of the United Reformed Church on the island and the other half working ecumenically with people of all faiths and none. And none of this would be possible without the many people who've kindly given me interviews, and my sincere thanks to you all. I wonder who and what I'll be talking about on the programme in the year ahead. And now, before I'm once again beaten by the clock, we'll end with some notice board news. Today in Union Mills Chapel, there's a selection of Christmas music and readings by Meadowside Choral Society, and it'll be followed by refreshments. That's in Union Mills Chapel this afternoon at 2:45. Also today, there will be a service of lessons and carols at St Luke's Church in Baldwin. That starts this evening at 6:30, and there will be refreshments afterwards. Also tonight, Port Erin Gospel Church will be showing a video about the 1859 religious revival and its impact. That's at 7 o'clock tonight, and everyone will be made most welcome. Moving to Wednesday, New Year's Eve, and Union Mills Chapel have a watch night service. Refreshments will be served from 11 p.m, with the service starting at 11:30. And finally, a reminder about the village carols on Saturday, the 3rd of January at 4:30 in the Tynwald Inn in St John's. Bring yourself and a plate of finger food to share. Words and music will be provided. You'll be packed in closer than an old-style football crowd, and with a drink in hand, singers will roar out the unique repertoire of Christmas songs that have become such an essential part of this season. Everyone is welcome. And that's all that we have time for now, but I'll be back tonight at 9 o'clock with Sundown, and I'd love you to come and join me in our virtual lounge for a great selection of easy listening music, plus your requests and dedications. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening and wishing you and those you love a blessed and peaceful week. And when it comes, Blaen Vai Nor, a very happy New Year.